The autumn rain had turned the windows of Hartley House into weeping glass, appropriate for what was happening inside. Catherine Hartley, Kate to those who had once called her friend, stood in her late father's study while two men discussed her future as though she were a brood mare at auction. "She's past her prime, Herbert, but intact, I presume." Lord Grimsby's voice carried the wet rasp of a man who'd spent 60 years drinking port and barking orders. He circled Kate slowly, his walking stick tapping against floorboards her father had once polished with pride. Her Uncle Herbert didn't look up from the papers spread across the desk. 6 months since her father's death, 6 months of watching creditors strip their home bare, and still Herbert Hartley wore that expression of perpetual inconvenience. 24 and untouched, the girls had no opportunities given our circumstances. Kate kept her eyes fixed on the rain beyond the window. £3,000 of debt. That's what her father's ambition had cost them when his shipping venture collapsed. £3,000, and her 16-year-old brother Thomas coughing blood in the room upstairs because they couldn't afford a proper physician. "I'll clear half the debt," Grimsby announced, positioning himself directly in her line of sight. His face was a network of broken veins, his breath sour even from 3 feet away. £1,800 for the girl. She'll manage my household and provide companionship. I've been a widower too long. Companionship. Kate's stomach turned at the delicate word, masking an indelicate reality. "Catherine." Herbert's voice held warning. "Lord Grimsby is being extraordinarily generous given your lack of dowry." She finally met her uncle's gaze. "I'm a person, not livestock." "You're a burden," Herbert corrected coldly. "And if you refuse this arrangement, I'll have no choice but to send Thomas to debtor's prison alongside you. The boy's illness won't excuse him from your father's obligations." The threat landed like a physical blow. Thomas, fragile and dependent, locked in that disease-ridden place. Kate's hands fisted in her worn muslin skirts. Grimsby smiled, revealing teeth gone brown with age. "Come now, girl. I'm offering you a home, security. Many would consider themselves fortunate." That word, fortunate, snapped something inside her. Kate turned to her uncle with a clarity that felt like ice settling in her veins. "You'll have my answer by morning." She walked from the room before either man could respond, climbed the stairs to a small chamber, and began packing the few possessions that remained hers. £12 in coins she'd hidden from the creditors, a change of clothes, her mother's silver locket, and a week-old newspaper she'd saved for the kindling, except now she smoothed it flat and studied the advertisement she'd noticed days ago. "Widower seeks practical wife. No dowry required. Simple life guaranteed. Respond to A. Marsh, Willowbrook Cottage, Havonshire. Simple. Practical. No dowry required." Kate read the words 3 times, then pulled out paper and ink. 3 days later, she stood outside a cottage in Havonshire, having spent nearly all her coin on the public coach. The building was modest but well-maintained, with a tidy garden gone dormant for winter. Smoke curled from the chimney. She knocked before doubt could overtake her. The man who answered wasn't what she'd expected. Widowers seeking practical wives should be old, weathered, desperate. This man was perhaps 30, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes the color of winter steel. He studied her with an intensity that made her want to step backward. "Mr. Marsh?" she asked. "You're the respondent to my advertisement." Not a question. His voice was educated, clipped. "Catherine Hartley?" "Kate," she corrected. "And yes." He stepped aside without ceremony. "Come in." The cottage interior was sparse but comfortable. A fire burned in the hearth. Books lined a shelf that seemed too fine for the modest surroundings. The man gestured to a chair and remained standing himself, hands clasped behind his back, in a posture almost military. "Why?" he asked abruptly. Kate blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Why respond to the advertisement?" He crossed to the window, presenting her with his profile. Even in simple wool and linen, he carried himself like someone accustomed to authority. A young woman traveling alone to marry a stranger suggests desperation. I want to understand what I'm acquiring. The bluntness should have offended her. Instead, Kate found it oddly refreshing after days of her uncle's manipulations. "My father died in debt. My uncle wishes to sell me to a man 3 times my age to clear half the obligation. I have a younger brother who'll be sent to debtor's prison if I refuse. So yes, Mr. Marsh, desperation is accurate." He turned to face her fully, and something shifted in his expression. Not pity. She would have hated pity, but perhaps recognition. "And you believe marrying a poor widower is preferable to a wealthy lord?" "I believe honesty is preferable to cruelty." Kate met his gaze steadily. "Your advertisement promised simplicity. I can cook, clean, manage a household. I won't demand affection or attention. If you need a wife in name and a housekeeper in practice, I can be that." "No love," he said flatly. "No illusions of romance." "None. I live simply. This cottage, a small income. Nothing grand. I've learned to live with far less, Mr. Marsh." He studied her for a long moment, and Kate forced herself not to fidget under that penetrating stare. Finally, he nodded once. "The vicar can perform the ceremony in 3 days. Can you wait that long, or does your situation demand more haste?" Relief nearly buckled her knees. 3 days is acceptable. Then we have an arrangement, Miss Hartley." He extended his hand, and when she took it, his grip was firm, his palm surprisingly smooth for a man claiming modest means. "I should warn you, I'm not an easy man to live with. I have particular habits. I value privacy and I don't tolerate deception." The last word carried strange weight, but Kate nodded. "I value honesty above all else, Mr. Marsh. You'll receive no deception from me." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Then perhaps we'll manage well enough." The wedding took place on a grey morning in the small village church. Kate wore her only decent dress, cleaned and pressed. Alexander arrived in a dark coat that, like everything about him, seemed subtly too fine for a poor widower. The vicar performed the ceremony with efficiency, and an older woman Kate had been introduced to as Mrs. Dawson served as witness, her shrewd eyes moving between bride and groom with an expression Kate couldn't decipher. When Alexander slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady. Kate's trembled slightly. They were strangers binding themselves together, and yet when he spoke, the vows, his voice held a solemnity that suggested the words meant something to him. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the vicar intoned. "You may kiss your bride." Alexander hesitated, then leaned down and pressed his lips to Kate's forehead. Brief, chaste, but carrying a tenderness that surprised her. They returned to the cottage in silence. Mrs. Dawson had prepared a simple meal, then departed with a meaningful look at Alexander that he returned with a slight shake of his head. Kate wondered what silent conversation she'd witnessed. "Your room is upstairs," Alexander said, leading her up narrow steps to a small chamber that was clean and comfortable. "I'll sleep in the room across the hall. You need not fear any unwanted advances. This is a practical arrangement, as we agreed." Kate nodded, setting down her small bag. "Thank you for your consideration." He lingered in the doorway. "You're not what I expected, Mrs. Marsh." The name, her new name, sent a strange flutter through her chest. "Nor are you, Mr. Marsh." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Perhaps that's fortunate for us both." He withdrew, but Kate noticed he left his door ajar across the hall. An invitation or a precaution, she couldn't determine. She sat on the bed, turning the gold band on her finger, and studied the room more carefully. The furniture was simple but well made. The curtains were quality fabric. And when she opened the small wardrobe, she found women's clothing waiting, practical dresses in her size, as though he'd anticipated her measurements with uncanny accuracy. Who was Alexander Marsh, really? A poor widower shouldn't have such resources, such bearing, such educated speech. Kate moved to the window and looked out at the darkening garden. She'd married a stranger to escape one trap, but the sensation growing in her chest suggested she might have entered another entirely different kind of snare. The difference was, this one didn't fill her with dread. This one made her curious. And perhaps, despite all her assertions about practical arrangements, just a little bit hopeful. Morning arrived with pale sunlight, streaming through curtains Kate had forgotten to close. She dressed quickly in one of the dresses from the wardrobe. It fit perfectly, which raised new questions she filed away, and descended to find the cottage empty. A covered plate waited on the table with bread, cheese, and an apple. A note beside it read simply, "Outside. Join me if you wish." Kate ate standing, hunger winning over propriety, then wrapped herself in her shawl and ventured into the garden. She found Alexander at the rear fence line, hammering at a section that had come loose. He'd removed his coat, working in shirt sleeves despite the autumn chill. When he noticed her approach, he didn't stop working. "Sleep well?" he asked, driving another nail with practiced efficiency. "Better than I have in months." Kate studied the fence, then the tools laid out on the grass. "Do you need assistance?" He paused mid-swing. "You know fence repair? After my father died, we couldn't afford servants. I learned what was necessary." She picked up a hammer. "Where would you like me to start?" For a moment, Alexander simply stared at her. Then something shifted in his expression. Surprise giving way to something warmer. "Hold this post steady while I secure it." They worked in companionable silence, Kate bracing wood while Alexander hammered. The physical labor felt good after days of travel and anxiety. She'd spent too long sitting in rooms while men discussed her fate. This, mud on her hem, splinters threatening her palms, cold air in her lungs, felt real. "Your hands aren't calloused," she observed after a while. Alexander's grip on the hammer was competent, but his palms were smooth when they brushed against hers, steadying a post. He didn't look at her. "I wasn't always poor." "What happened?" "Poor investments, family obligations." He set down the hammer and examined their work. The usual story of genteel poverty. It wasn't the whole truth. Kate sensed it the way she'd learned to sense her father's optimistic lies about the business recovering. But she'd promised no deception, not demanded it in return. "And your wife? Mrs. Dawson mentioned she passed several years ago." Alexander's jaw tightened. 3 years. I prefer not to speak of her, if you don't mind." "Of course." Kate released the post, flexing her fingers. "I didn't mean to pry." "You're not prying. You're asking reasonable questions about the man you married." He rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. "Isabella was beautiful, accomplished, everything a wife should be. But she wasn't—" He stopped, frustration clear on his face. Kate waited, recognizing the struggle of someone trying to speak truth without betraying the dead. "She didn't marry me for love," Alexander finally said. "And I think she regretted the choice every day until she died. I've spent 3 years wondering if I somehow failed her, if I could have been different, better, if I hadn't been so—" He cut himself off abruptly. "Forgive me. You didn't ask for a confession." "I asked about your wife." Kate said quietly. That includes the difficult parts. He met her eyes then, and the raw vulnerability there made her breath catch. This wasn't the composed man who'd interviewed her so coldly. This was someone who'd been hurt and hadn't healed properly, like a bone set wrong. I won't regret marrying you, Kate heard herself say. Whatever else comes of this arrangement, I promise you that. Alexander stared at her, something unreadable crossing his features. Careful, Mrs. Marsh. You'll make me believe in things I've learned not to trust. The moment stretched between them, charged with an awareness that hadn't existed before. Then Kate reached for another post, and Alexander cleared his throat and picked up his hammer, and they returned to work. But something had shifted. The fence they were repairing felt less like a barrier now. An hour later, Kate was reaching for a nail when the wood slipped. She felt the splinter drive deep into her palm and hissed at the sharp pain. Let me see. Alexander dropped his tools and caught her wrist, turning her hand to examine the injury. His touch was gentle, clinical, but Kate felt her pulse jump anyway. Come inside. This needs proper attention. In the cottage, he retrieved a kit that contained bandages and tweezers far too fine for a poor widower's supplies. Kate said nothing as he settled her hand on the table and bent over it, his dark hair falling forward as he worked. His fingers were deft, removing the splinter with minimal additional pain. You've done this before, Kate observed. I've had practice with injuries. He cleaned the wound with something that stung. Hold still. I am holding still. You're trembling. Kate hadn't realized. Alexander looked up, and their faces were suddenly very close. She could see flecks of darker grey in his eyes, the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. His thumb moved absently over her wrist, feeling her racing pulse, and his eyes dropped to her mouth. The door opened. They sprang apart as Mrs. Dawson entered with a basket of provisions. The older woman's eyebrows rose slightly as she took in the scene. Kate's flushed face, Alexander's guilty expression, the bandages scattered across the table. Interrupted something, did I? Mrs. Dawson asked mildly. Miss Hartley, Mrs. Marsh, injured her hand, Alexander said quickly. Too quickly. Mrs. Marsh now, is it? Mrs. Dawson smiled. Finally remembering the girls, your wife, your... Mr. Marsh? She'd caught herself on something, Kate noticed. Alexander shot the housekeeper a warning look that Mrs. Dawson ignored completely. The older woman began unpacking her basket, humming cheerfully. I should finish the fence, Alexander muttered, practically fleeing the cottage. Kate stared after him, cradling her bandaged hand. Mrs. Dawson pressed a cup of tea into her other hand and patted her shoulder. Give him time, dear. He's forgotten how to let people close, but I think you're good for him. We barely know each other. Sometimes that's when you see people most clearly. Mrs. Dawson settled into a chair, without expectations clouding the view. Kate thought about that as she sipped her tea and watched through the window as Alexander attacked the fence repair with renewed vigor, without expectations. She'd come here expecting nothing, and somehow that made every small moment feel significant. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like the first warm day after a long winter. A week passed in a rhythm Kate hadn't known she'd needed. She managed the cottage, cooked meals, and worked beside Alexander in the garden. They spoke little but existed comfortably in each other's space. He read by the fire in the evenings while she mended clothes. Sometimes she'd look up to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. They slept in separate rooms with doors ajar. It felt like a question neither was ready to answer. Then the letter arrived. Kate recognized her uncle's handwriting and felt her stomach drop. She opened it with shaking hands. Catherine. Thomas has taken a turn for the worse. The physician demands £50 or he'll cease treatment. I've no funds remaining, and Grimsby has withdrawn his offer given your disappearance. If you've any resources in your new situation, your brother's life depends on it." Herbert Kate read it 3 times, her vision blurring. £50. A fortune to someone who'd married a poor widower. She found Alexander in the small library he'd claimed as a study, surrounded by books that continued to seem too valuable for his supposed circumstances. "I need to ask something," she said without preamble, "and I hate asking, but I have no choice." Alexander set down his book immediately. "What's wrong?" "My brother is ill. He needs a physician." She held out the letter. "I need to borrow £50. I'll work it off however you wish. I can take in mending, find employment in the village, anything." "Stop." Alexander stood, crossing to her in 3 strides. "You're my wife. Your family is my responsibility now." "But no." His voice was firm but not unkind. "I have the funds. I'll send them today." Kate felt tears burn behind her eyes. She'd held herself together through her father's death, the loss of their home, her uncle's manipulations. But this simple kindness cracked something inside her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't... Thank you." Alexander's expression softened. Hesitantly, awkwardly, he reached out and drew her against his chest. Kate went rigid with surprise, then slowly relaxed into the embrace. His heart beat steady beneath her ear. One of his hands came up to cup the back of her head. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "About your brother. About all of it. You have nothing to apologize for. You've been—" Kate pulled back slightly to look up at him. "Kind, when you had no obligation to be." Catherine. Her full name on his lips sent warmth through her. "My first wife. I couldn't help her. She didn't want my help, didn't need anything I could offer. But you let me be useful. Do you know how rare that is?" His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and Kate's breath caught. The awareness from the fence repair returned, stronger now. Alexander's eyes dropped to her mouth, and she saw the exact moment he realized what he was about to do. He started to pull away. Kate rose on her toes and kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a touch of lips, but it sent shock through both of them. Alexander froze, his hands tightening on her arms. For a heartbeat, Kate thought he might push her away. Then he made a sound low in his throat and kissed her back. Not gentle, not tentative. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head as he deepened the kiss with a hunger that matched the loneliness she'd sensed in him. Kate clutched his shirt, dizzy with the sudden intensity of it. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "That wasn't—" Alexander started, then stopped. "We agreed. I know what we agreed." Kate's lips felt swollen, sensitive. "I'm not asking to change our arrangement. I just needed to do that. Once." He stared at her, something tortured in his expression. "Kate, you deserve better than a practical marriage to someone like me." "Someone like you?" She almost laughed. "You've been nothing but honorable." "You don't know." He cut himself off abruptly, stepping back. "I should send that money for your brother." "Excuse me." He left quickly, almost fleeing. Kate touched her lips, confused by his reaction. The kiss had affected him. She'd felt it in the way he'd responded, the way his hands had shaken slightly when he released her. So why pull away? That night, she lay in bed listening to him pace in the room across the hall. Back and forth, like a caged animal. She wanted to go to him, to demand answers to the questions multiplying in her mind. But something in his earlier distress stopped her. Sleep came fitfully. Kate dozed and woke until sometime past midnight when she heard a different sound, a crash, then a low groan of pain. She was across the hall before conscious thought caught up. Alexander lay tangled in his bedsheets on the floor, his face flushed with fever. Papers and books were scattered where he'd apparently tried to rise and failed. "Alexander!" Kate dropped to her knees beside him. His skin burned under her palm. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened, glassy and unfocused. "Kate, I'm here. You're burning up." She tried to help him back to the bed, but he was dead weight. "Mrs. Dawson won't be back until tomorrow. Can you stand?" He tried, managed to get his feet under him with her support. Together they stumbled the few feet to the bed. Kate settled him against the pillows and ran for water and cloths. When she returned, Alexander was delirious, muttering words that made no sense. "Isabella, I'm sorry. Couldn't love you the way—" His head tossed on the pillow. "Father was wrong. Title isn't— I just wanted—" Kate pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "Shh. Save your strength. Blackmore." The word was clear, definite. "Must return to Blackmore. Can't hide forever. Not fair to her. Kate deserves truth." Kate froze. Blackmore. She knew that name. The Duke of Blackmore was one of the wealthiest men in England, his estate legendary even among those who'd never seen it. There was no reason Alexander should be talking about "Your Grace." He caught her wrist with surprising strength, his fever-bright eyes locking on hers. "Your Grace, forgive me. She was meant to be Duchess, but she loved another. I couldn't be what she needed, couldn't be—" The words cut off as he fell into restless sleep. Kate sat frozen beside him, her heart hammering. "Your Grace. Blackmore. Duchess." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. She stood on shaking legs and left the room. The study. She'd noticed before how he kept it locked when he wasn't present. Now she found the key in his coat pocket and opened the door with hands that trembled. The books on the shelves weren't just expensive, they were rare. First editions, some of them. On the desk lay correspondence addressed to Alexander Thornfield, Duke of Blackmore. In the drawer, a signet ring bearing a ducal crest. Kate sank into the chair, staring at the evidence of her husband's deception. He wasn't a poor widower. He was a duke. One of the most powerful men in England had married her under false pretenses, had let her believe she was saving herself from exploitation while he— What? Played at poverty? Tested her? She remembered her uncle's words. "Grimsby is being extraordinarily generous given your lack of dowry. She'd been merchandise to Herbert, livestock to Grimsby. What was she to Alexander? To the Duke of Blackmore? An experiment? Amusement? The hurt was physical, a tightness in her chest that made breathing difficult. She'd promised him honesty. She'd been brutally honest about her desperation, her circumstances, her reasons for accepting his proposal. And he'd lied with every word, every gesture, every moment of false intimacy. The kindness about her brother's physician fees. What was £50 to a duke? Nothing. A pittance. Had he been laughing at her gratitude? Kate pressed her hands to her face, fighting tears. She'd been stupid to hope. Stupid to let herself feel something for a man she barely knew. Stupid to think someone might value her for herself rather than what she could provide. When Mrs. Dawson arrived the next morning, Kate was packed. She'd spent the night tending Alexander's fever. She wouldn't abandon someone ill, regardless of his lies. But dawn found her resolved. The fever had broken an hour ago. He'd sleep for some time yet. Long enough for her to be gone. "You're leaving," Mrs. Dawson said flatly, taking in the packed bag. "Did you know?" Kate demanded. "That he's the Duke of Blackmore?" The older woman's expression was answer enough. Kate laughed bitterly. "Of course you did. Everyone was in on the deception except the fool who married him." "It wasn't deception, child. It was—" "Don't." Kate held up a hand. "I don't want explanations. I accepted this marriage because it was honest. a practical arrangement between equals, but I'm not his equal. I never was. I'm just another woman he bought, except he did it more prettily than Lord Grimsby. That's not fair. Fair? Kate's voice rose. What's fair about lying to someone for weeks, about making them think they're in a partnership when really they're just… What, a project? A test? How long before he tired of the game and sent me away? Mrs. Dawson's expression softened. He wasn't testing you. He was protecting himself. Then he should have been honest about what he was protecting. Kate picked up her bag. Please tell His Grace that I'll write regarding annulment proceedings. Given the false pretenses, I'm sure it can be arranged quickly. Kate, Mrs. Marsh. Kate corrected coldly. Except I'm not even that, am I? I'm Lady Blackmore, a title I never wanted, married to a man I never really knew. She walked out before Mrs. Dawson could respond, her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. The morning was grey and cold, appropriate weather for the death of hope. Kate had no plan beyond leaving, but she'd learned to survive on very little. She'd find a way forward. Behind her, in the cottage that had briefly felt like home, a duke slept unaware that his carefully constructed refuge had crumbled, like every lie eventually must. Kate made it as far as the village before the reality of her situation settled over her like winter cold. She had no money. She'd spent her last coins on the journey here. No references for employment, no family who'd take her in. She sat on a bench near the posting inn, staring at nothing while villagers hurried past on morning business. She'd left to preserve her dignity, but dignity wouldn't fill her stomach or put a roof over her head. And Thomas, the money Alexander had sent, would keep him in treatment for now, but what happened when it ran out? She'd fled one cage only to find herself in another of her own making. Stubborn pride is cold comfort, Kate Hartley. She muttered to herself. I believe it's Kate Thornfield now. Kate's head snapped up. Alexander stood before her, dressed hastily, his hair dishevelled and face still pale from fever. He swayed slightly, and she jumped up instinctively to steady him before remembering she was angry. You should be in bed, she said curtly, releasing him. You were ill. And I woke to find my wife gone. His grey eyes were intent on her face. Mrs. Dawson told me what you discovered. You mean your lies? Yes. No defensiveness, no excuses. Just that simple acknowledgement. Walk with me, please. You can leave after if you still wish, but give me a chance to explain. Kate wanted to refuse, but curiosity warred with hurt, and curiosity won. They walked in silence to the edge of the village, where a path led into woods gone bare with autumn. Only when they were alone did Alexander speak. My wife, my first wife, was Isabella Lennox, daughter of an earl, beautiful, accomplished, everything society deemed appropriate for a duchess. His voice was flat, reciting facts. Our marriage was arranged by our fathers. I was 23, she was 20. We both understood it was a business arrangement. He stopped, gripping a tree trunk as though needing support. Kate remained silent, waiting. I thought perhaps we might build affection despite the circumstances. I tried. God knows I tried. But Isabella, she was in love with someone else, a younger son with no prospects. Her father had forbidden the match. Alexander's jaw clenched. She went through with marrying me because she had no choice, and she hated me for it. Alexander, let me finish. He met her eyes, and the pain there was rawer than anything she'd seen. 3 years we lived as strangers under one roof. She had her rooms, I had mine. She attended social functions when required, and avoided me the rest of the time. I told myself it was enough, that I didn't need affection, just an heir and a functioning household. He pushed away from the tree, pacing. Then I received word she'd been thrown from her horse 5 miles from the estate. She died before I reached her, and I discovered she'd been on her way back from meeting her lover at an inn. Kate pressed her hand to her mouth. I'm sorry. Everyone assumed she'd been riding alone, so I let them believe it. But I knew she'd spent 3 years trapped in a marriage she despised, with a man she couldn't love. His voice broke slightly. I was the Duke of Blackmore. Powerful, wealthy, exactly what every woman was supposed to want. But my own wife preferred risking her reputation to being near me. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? He faced her fully. After she died, I started questioning everything. The title, the wealth, the position. Was any of it actually me? Or was I just a collection of things people wanted to acquire? I'd never had a conversation that wasn't calculated. Never had someone look at me and see Alexander instead of the Duke. Understanding began to dawn. Kate felt her anger waver. So I ran. Alexander continued quietly. Told everyone I needed time to grieve, left my steward in charge of the estate and came here, to this cottage I'd inherited from an aunt, used my mother's maiden name, placed that advertisement because I was lonely and thought perhaps— He laughed bitterly. I don't even know what I thought. That if someone married me without knowing about the title, it might be real. You should have told me. Kate's voice was unsteady. When we married, you should have— I know. He stepped closer. And I tried, 12 times. But you looked at me like I was just a man, not a duke, not a fortune, not a title, just Alexander. And it felt so impossibly good that I convinced myself one more day wouldn't hurt. Then another day, another week. He stopped within arm's reach. I'm sorry, you deserved honesty, and I denied you that because I was too much a coward to risk losing what we were building. Kate's throat tightened. What were we building? I don't know. His hand rose as though to touch her face, then fell. Something real, something I'd never had before. When you kissed me yesterday, I wanted so badly to believe you saw me. Not what I could give you, not what I could do for your brother, just me. But then I remembered I'd lied about everything, and it felt like watching Isabella all over again. I'm not Isabella. The words came out fierce. I don't love someone else. I wasn't forced into this marriage. No, but you married a poor widower, not a duke. If I'd known, I never would have approached you. Kate admitted. Because a duke doesn't marry someone like me. A duke marries an earl's daughter. But Alexander Marsh? She took a shaking breath. I married Alexander Marsh because he was honest and kind and treated me like a person. If you're telling me that was real, that the man I've lived with these weeks is actually you, then— She broke off, unable to finish. Alexander closed the remaining distance between them. It was the most real I've been in years, he said quietly, working beside you, talking with you, sitting by the fire while you mended and I read. That was more genuine than anything in my entire previous life. Then why— Kate's voice cracked. Why offer to send me away with explanations and funds like I'm another obligation to discharge? Because you deserve better than a man too broken to trust his own heart. His hand finally rose to cup her cheek. Because I've spent 3 years convinced I'm unlovable except for what I can provide. Because I thought if I gave you an escape, you'd take it, and that would confirm every fear I've carried since Isabella died. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Kate reached up and gripped his wrist, holding his hand against her face. And I've heard a lot of stupid things, so that's saying something. Alexander's breath hitched. Kate, you're the Duke of Blackmore. She continued firmly. Fine. I hate that you lied, but I understand why. You wanted to know if someone could see past the title, and I did. I saw a man who bandaged my hand and paid for my brother's physician and kissed me like it meant something. Her eyes met his. Did it mean something, Alexander? The truth now. Yes. The word came out hoarse. God help me, yes. I've fallen in love with my own wife, and I'm terrified you only wanted the man I was pretending to be. Then you're an idiot, Kate said, and kissed him. This time there was no hesitation on either side. Alexander pulled her against him fiercely, one hand in her hair, the other at her waist. Kate poured everything into the kiss, her anger at his deception, her relief at his honesty, her desperate hope that this might actually be real. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. I don't want your title, Kate whispered against his mouth. I don't want Blackmore Hall or the fortune or any of it. I want the man who fixes fences and reads by firelight. If that man happens to be a duke, I'll learn to live with it. Alexander laughed, the sound breaking into something like a sob. What if I offered you annulment anyway? A generous settlement, enough to clear all your family's debts and set you up comfortably for life. Your freedom, with no strings attached. Kate pulled back enough to see his face. Why would you do that? To prove this isn't like before, that I'm not trapping you. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I need to know you're choosing me, Kate, not out of desperation or gratitude or lack of options, actually choosing me. She stared at him, understanding dawning. This was the test, not of her but of himself. Could he offer her everything and accept if she walked away? Could he trust that staying meant something real? Kate stepped back, out of his arms. Alexander's expression closed immediately, pain flickering across his features. She watched him brace for rejection, saw him start to rebuild walls she'd only just seen him lower. No, she said clearly. He blinked. No, I won't take your settlement. No, I won't accept annulment. Kate crossed her arms, lifting her chin. You married me, Your Grace. You're stuck with me now. Kate, I could take your money, she continued. Clear the debts, set up Thomas somewhere comfortable, start fresh. That would be the smart choice, probably. The safe choice. She took a step toward him. But I don't want safe. I don't want convenient. I want the complicated, frustrating man who lied to me because he was too hurt to trust anyone. I want arguments and honesty and the chance to build something real. You're certain? His voice was barely audible. Because once we return to Blackmore, everything changes. You'll be a duchess. There will be expectations, society, scrutiny. Will you be there? Kate interrupted. Of course. Then I can handle the rest. She reached for his hand. I'm not afraid of society or titles or expectations, Alexander. I'm only afraid of losing what we found in that cottage. The quiet mornings and shared work and moments when we were just two people trying to figure out how to be married. Alexander pulled her close again, burying his face against her hair. I don't deserve you. Probably not. Kate felt him shake with laughter. But you're going to spend the rest of your life trying to, so I suppose that's something. He pulled back, and the expression on his face was so full of wonder that Kate felt her eyes burn. I love you, he said, the words rough with emotion. I know I've no right to say it yet, given everything, but I need you to know. This isn't gratitude or convenience or settling for practical. I love you, Catherine Thornfield. Kate, she corrected, smiling through tears. And I love you too, you impossible man. He kissed her again, softer now, with a tenderness that made her ache. When they parted, he kept his forehead pressed to hers. We should probably discuss the practical realities. Blackmore Hall is enormous. There are servants, tenants, social obligations. My aunt will likely have opinions about everything. The ton will be scandalous about our sudden marriage. Will there be fences that need repairing? Alexander blinked at the question. What? At Blackmore Hall, are there fences that need maintaining? Gardens that need work? Kate smiled at his confused expression. You said yourself the past weeks were the most real you'd been in years. I won't let you lose that just because we're going back to your real life. So if there are fences to mend, or vegetables to plant, or anything that needs doing, we do it together. Understanding flooded his features. There's a walled garden that's been neglected since my mother died. Acres of it. Would take years to restore properly. Perfect. Kate laced her fingers through his. We'll start tomorrow. Tomorrow I need to meet with my steward about estate business I've been avoiding for weeks. Then I'll come with you. I managed my father's books before everything fell apart. I can learn yours. Alexander stared at her. You'd want to be involved in estate management? I'd want to be involved in your life, Kate corrected. All of it. The Duke parts and the Alexander parts and everything in between. That's what marriage should be, isn't it? Actual partnership? I don't know, he admitted. My first marriage wasn't. I've no model for what you're describing. Then we'll figure it out as we go. She squeezed his hand. Together. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. How did I get so fortunate? You placed an advertisement for a practical wife and got more than you bargained for. Infinitely more. Alexander tucked her against his side as they started walking back toward the village. Mrs. Dawson is going to be insufferably smug about this. She already is. I could see it when I was leaving. She never approved of Isabella, said the girl had no substance. He paused. You, apparently, she likes. I'm sure the feeling is mutual, even if she did help you lie to me for weeks. I'll make it up to you, Alexander promised, however long it takes. Kate considered this. You could start by telling me your full name, your real full name. Alexander James Edward Thornfield, 9th Duke of Blackmore, Earl of Havenshire, Viscount Ashford, Baron Willowbrook. He recited it dryly. I've a few more minor titles that no one uses. That's ridiculous. I know. I'm still calling you Alexander. I'd prefer it. He glanced down at her. And you're Catherine Anne Thornfield, Duchess of Blackmore, though I imagine you'll insist on Kate. Obviously. She paused. Duchess, that's going to take adjustment. We don't have to go back immediately. We could stay at the cottage a while longer if you'd prefer. Let you grow accustomed to the idea before facing society. Kate thought about it, then shook her head. No, running away didn't work for you, and it won't work for me. Besides, the sooner we face whatever comes, the sooner we can actually start our life together. Our life. Alexander repeated softly, as though testing the words. Yes, I'd like that. They reached the cottage to find Mrs. Dawson watching from the window with an expression of deep satisfaction. She opened the door before they'd reached it. Sorted yourselves out, did you? She asked tartly. We did, Alexander confirmed. Kate will be returning to Blackmore with me, as my wife and Duchess. About time. Mrs. Dawson stepped aside to let them in. I'll pack your things, Your Grace, your actual things, not the shabby wardrobe you've been pretending with. After she'd bustled off, Kate turned to Alexander. How long were you planning to maintain the deception? Honestly, I don't think I had a plan beyond taking it day by day. He pulled her close again, as though still not quite believing she was real. Every morning I woke up expecting you to see through me. Every evening I went to bed thinking tomorrow I'd tell you, but then you'd smile at me over breakfast, or we'd work together in the garden, and I'd think, one more day of this, just one more. No more deceptions, Kate said firmly, from either of us. I'll tell you when I'm overwhelmed or frightened or uncertain. You'll tell me when you're struggling or doubting or reverting to Duke instead of Alexander. We talk about things, even when it's uncomfortable. Agreed? Agreed. He kissed her forehead. Though I should warn you, I'm terrible at discussing feelings. You managed fairly well in the woods just now. I was terrified you'd leave, Fear apparently makes me articulate. Kate laughed. Then I'll have to be terrifying more often. Please don't. I prefer you exactly as you are. They stood in the cottage that had been their refuge, holding each other as afternoon light filtered through windows. Tomorrow would bring change. The return to Blackmore. The revelation of their marriage to society. The navigation of a world Kate had never been prepared for. But in this moment, there was only them. Two people who'd married for practical reasons and found something infinitely more valuable. Tell me about Blackmore, Kate said eventually. The truth, this time. So Alexander described his ancestral home, the marble halls and formal gardens, the portrait gallery full of disapproving ancestors, the library that spanned 2 floors and contained volumes collected over generations. He told her about the staff who'd served his family for decades, the tenants who depended on the estate, the responsibilities he'd been trying to escape. It sounds lonely, Kate observed. It is. He corrected himself. But perhaps not anymore. Show me tomorrow, Kate decided. The whole of it. Everything you've been avoiding. We'll face it together. And we'll make it ours instead of just yours. Ours. Alexander smiled, genuine and unguarded. I like the sound of that. That night, Kate fell asleep in Alexander's arms in his room, door no longer ajar, but firmly closed. They'd crossed the threshold from practical arrangement to genuine marriage, and there was no going back. Nor did either of them wish to. Morning came with autumn sunlight and the sound of carriage wheels on gravel. Alexander's actual coach, sent for by Mrs. Dawson, was considerably grander than anything Kate had ridden in. The crest on the door made her stomach flutter, but Alexander's hand in hers steadied her. Ready? He asked. Kate thought of Thomas, who'd be properly cared for now, of her father, who'd taught her to face challenges directly, of the girl who'd fled her uncle's house with £12 and determination. That girl had become a duchess not through scheming or manipulation, but through honesty and luck, and refusing to settle for less than she deserved. Ready? She confirmed. The journey to Blackmore took 3 hours. Kate watched the landscape change from modest villages to increasingly grand estates. When Blackmore Hall finally came into view, she understood why Alexander had hidden from it. The house was magnificent and intimidating in equal measure. Ancient stone and soaring towers, windows that caught the afternoon sun like diamonds. It's beautiful, Kate said honestly. And absolutely terrifying. Yes to both. Alexander squeezed her hand. But remember what you said. We'll make it ours. The staff assembled in the main hall to meet their new duchess. Kate saw surprise on many faces. They'd expected notice of their duke's return, not the arrival of a wife. But Mrs. Dawson had apparently sent word ahead, because the elderly butler bowed smoothly and welcomed Your Grace and Her Grace as though sudden marriages were perfectly normal. Alexander gave Kate a brief tour, pointing out the rooms she'd need to know. The Duchess's suite, which hadn't been opened since his mother's death. The morning room, where she might receive callers. The formal dining room that could seat 40. It was overwhelming, but Kate focused on the man beside her, rather than the magnificence surrounding them. In the neglected garden his mother had loved. They stopped. Overgrown roses tangled with weeds, and paths had disappeared beneath years of unchecked growth. It would take tremendous work to restore. We'll start here, Kate decided. Tomorrow morning, you and me and gardening tools. Alexander looked at her with such love that Kate felt her breath catch. The staff will think I've gone mad, having the Duke of Blackmore pulling weeds. The staff will adjust. Kate turned to face him fully, taking both his hands. I fell in love with Alexander Marsh, who fixed fences and read by firelight and bandaged my injured hand. That man happens to be the Duke of Blackmore. So we'll be both, the Duke and Duchess when required, Alexander and Kate when we're alone. But we'll never lose what we found in that cottage. I won't let us. Promise. His voice was soft, vulnerable. Promise. Kate rose on her toes and kissed him, there in the overgrown garden that would be their first joint project. We're in this together now, all of it. She had married out of desperation, accepted a stranger's proposal to escape an unbearable fate. She'd expected practical arrangements and separate lives. Instead, she'd found a partner who saw her as she truly was, not lesser for her circumstances, not invisible despite her losses. And in seeing her clearly, he'd allowed himself to be seen in return. Together, Alexander agreed, pulling her close as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. Always together. They stood in the ruins of beauty waiting to be restored. Two people who'd been broken by different circumstances and found wholeness in each other. The future would bring challenges, society's judgment, the weight of responsibility, the daily work of building a genuine marriage. But they'd face it as they'd faced everything since that moment Kate had knocked on a cottage door and found more than she'd bargained for. She had married the poor widower. His hidden identity had shocked her. But in the end, both the poverty and the dukedom were merely circumstances. What mattered was the man beneath the disguises and the love they'd built on a foundation of unexpected honesty. The rest, Kate thought, as Alexander kissed her in the garden that would be theirs, was just details.